弟兄姐妹以及线上的同龄，大家安息日平安快乐。
Peace and joy to all fellow brothers and sisters.
感谢神啊！那安息日下午第一节啊，我们在这边共同做属灵的聚会。
And we thank God that we are able to gather here together to have this kind of spiritual worship.
在下午的这个时段里头，要一起来学习探讨美好灵性的考验。
And for my topic this afternoon, it will be up on spiritual testings.
在人生里头有很多不同的考验。
We know that in our lives, we will encounter many kinds of trials and testings.
身为义人，有义人的考验。
The righteous will also have to go through these same kinds of testings and trials.
或者是完全人，你也要接受完全人的考验。
As a blameless man, we will also encounter testings and trials.
那下午这个主题最主要就是要来探讨有关但以理他美好的灵性。
And for my topic this afternoon, we're going to study about the life of Daniel and what he went through.
但以理他被称为是美好的灵性的人啊。
We know that Daniel had a very beautiful, virtuous life.
因此下午这个时段啊，就是要来探讨他面对的考验。
And we shall study on one aspect of his life, and it's regarding his trials.
那进入这个主题之前呢，我们请翻译来读3段的但以理书啊。
And I would like to read to you these 3 passages from the Bible.
我们就首先来看但以理书的第1章。
Let's first of all turn to the book of Daniel, chapter 1.
请读第3节到第8节。
And I will read from verses 3 to 8. Daniel, chapter 1, verses 3 to 8. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Verse 4, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualities to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. Verse 5, the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Verse 6, among these were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Verse 7, the chief official gave them new names. To Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. Verse 8, but Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way.
我们继续读第2段，但以理书3章1节到6节。
Let's continue with the second passage in Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 90 feet high and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Verse 2, he then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. Verse 3, so the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, this is what you have commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. Verse 5, as soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 6, whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace.
我们继续读第3段6章的3节到10节。
The third passage will be read from Daniel chapter 6, verses 3 to 10. Daniel chapter 6, verses 3 to 10. Verse 3, now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Verse 4, at this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Verse 6, so the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing, verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room, where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before.
有关刚才所读的、所看的这些经节，
And with regard to the passages that we just read,
就是我们下午要一起探讨这个但以理他美好的灵性的几个考验重点。
and this will form the context of the trials and testing that Daniel would have to go through.
我想，身为基督徒或者是弟兄姐妹，
As Christians, as brothers and sisters in Christ,
或者是传道人以及教会的工人，
and not only the preachers as well as the church workers,
真的在每个人的信仰人生里面呢，
in our faith journey,
也许会像但以理以及他的3个朋友所面对不同的考验。
we may encounter, like Daniel and his 3 friends, many different testings and struggles.
所以今天下午我们所要学习、要认识的，就是但以理他面对，因为有好名声，就是美好灵性。
And we see that Daniel, he was a person with good reputation.
他面对了这个美好的灵性，更面对了这个考验。
But yet, he also had to go through struggles and testings and hardships.
所以经过探讨之后，我想我们也一样肯定他真的有美好的灵性。
But after he went through his trials with flying color, he is a person that we can model after in our faith life.
所以下午这个时段里头，我们分为3个重点来探讨。
Therefore, I'd like to divide my sermon this afternoon into 3 parts.
第一个主题
And the first part is
这个是但以理他面对事实的考验
and this is indeed a fact that he truly encountered trials.
因为我们知道这种事实的考验会腐化我们每个人的信仰。
Because we know that testings will reveal our faith.
更可以看出但以理他是出生于贵族的家庭，
And we know that the family background of Daniel.
也是属于贵族的先知。
And he came from a line of prophets.
可是当时呢，他虽然呢成为一个战败国而被俘虏到国外的，
Even though he was a captive from Judah,
但以理他非常可贵。
he was great in one aspect.
当他被掳到巴比伦国王面前的时候，
When he was taken before the king of Babylon,
他竟然可以遇到这种美好的礼遇啊！
he was able to meet this kind of testings.
更能够跟他3个同伴在3年的时间一起来学习加勒底文字跟语言啊！
Because when he was in Babylon, he and his 3 friends were being educated in the Babylonian education.
更可以当时在国王所用的御膳上面一起来享用。
And him and his 3 friends were able to eat from the king's table.
也很难得他可以入到这个巴比伦国的内阁做官啊。
And he was also able to be promoted to be one of the great officials in the kingdom of Babylon.
结果呢，这4个人呢，他们都立志不用王的膳跟王的酒。
But we see that Daniel and his 3 friends resolved not to defile themselves with the king's food and wine,
避免来玷污了自己的身体。
because they refused to allow these things to defile their bodies.
所以刚才我们所读的但以理书的1章8节
Therefore, in Daniel chapter 1, verses 8,
特别强调说，他立志不以王的膳跟王所饮用的酒。
it says here that Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine.
而且但以理他非常的用心
And we see that Daniel was a very detail-oriented person.
他特地的去求那个太监长容他不玷污自己。
And he even approached the eunuch or the official about about this request.
这种动作可以看出他真的很用心去追求。
And we can see that he was a very detail-oriented person.
为了要达到他个人的立志而完成这个理想的目标。
In order to stay pure, therefore he had this resolve.
照理讲，他这么做很有可能会触怒到王
He was not afraid that by doing so, he would offend the king.
甚至这种触怒到王也许会丧命甚至会下监狱的。
Because he knew that if he were to step on the king's toes, he might altogether lost his life.
所以为了要达成他自己对神的立志，
Therefore, in order to show God about his resolve and determination,
他本身就是攻克己身
therefore he knew that he had to discipline himself spiritually and be courageous.
他这么做的用意就是表明对神的忠诚
This only goes to show Daniel's heart that he wanted to remain faithful to God.
不被这种权力而吸引去
He was not afraid of all the political powers that were going on around him.
没有去动摇他的信仰，
He was totally unmoved in his faith,
没有去腐化他内心对神的这种忠诚的理智。
and it did not corrupt or decrease his resolve toward God.
所看出的这一切的动作，
Therefore, from his actions, we can see that
就是他不向事实去妥协。
he did not compromise himself.
今天我们看到我们的社会、我们的环境，
And today, when we look at our society around us,
人太聪明
people are getting so smarter.
所以很善于去包装
And sometimes they package themselves so well on the outside.
把这种事实的生活去把它俗化，去把它包装。
And sometimes they will package or compromise what is on the inside with the outside.
我想我们在座的大部分可以说是从 其他的地方移民来到这边。
I'm sure today, those of us who are sitting here today, we hail from different countries.
这种现象包括我在内啊。
And I am actually included in this.
因为当我们来到这个北美这个地方啊，
When we migrate to North America,
那个时候说什么鬼节啊，就是那个万圣节啊。
and with regard to Halloween,
那个时候不知道什么叫做万圣节啊。
at that time, I had no clue what Halloween was all about.
哇，大家几个上英文班的同学一起嗑了那个南瓜然后去挨家挨户去跟人家要糖果。
And in one of my ESL classes, the teacher once mentioned about carving pumpkins during Halloweens and going around for trick and treating.
这件事情回想起来啊，
As I look back and remember this particular incident,
这是被包装、被美化了。
this Halloween is actually something that's packaged.
把这种鬼节把它弄得很浪漫啊。
Even though this is a devilish tradition, they try to package it to be something that's better than it really was.
所以身为基督徒，你就得要看清楚啊。
Therefore, as Christians, we must have this foresight and the wisdom
这是一种包装来的文化。
that sometimes our culture is being packaged to look nice on the outside.
就好比我的家乡啊，有那个7月什么鬼节啦。
Just like in my hometown and village in Taiwan, we have all these kind of traditional kind of customs.
结果把那个鬼节称什么好兄弟啊。
And during the Ghost Month, we are asked to address the ghost as our good brothers.
我看如果从外地去的人啊，外国人去到我们的家乡，也许是哇，这个好兄弟好啊。
If you are foreign to my village or hometown, you may think that it's kind of fun.
这也看出一种包装的文化。
But actually, this is just a package.
那现在另一种包装文化就是图腾啊。
Another kind of package is the totem poles.
我们来看一下《申命记》12章。
Let's turn to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 3.
申命记12章，我们来看第3节。
Deuteronomy, chapter 12, verse 3.
12章的第3节。我要拆毁他们的地坛，打退他们的柱像，用火焚烧他们的木偶，砍下他们雕刻的神像，并将其名从那地方除灭。这是过去在选民的时代。
And this happened during the time of the Israelites.
这个透过神的仆人来诉说，要拆毁这些祭坛。
And through the prophet of God, the people were commanded to break down their idols
更提到要打碎他们的柱像。
and to also to burn and break down their Asherah poles.
又说要用火来焚烧木偶，
And not only that, to burn it in the fire
更要砍下他们那些雕刻的神像。
and to also smash their sacred stones.
圣经这么清楚告诉我们，
Here, the Bible clearly tells us,
可是现在把这种图腾柱像说什么是文化什么艺术
today, however, totem poles is packaged as being a culture or an art form.
所以像这种都是属于这种包装出来的一种东西
Totem poles are actually packaged.
像这样都会让我们基督徒迷失了。
And this is also a way to deceive or mislead the Christians.
那还有一种包装的文化，
And there is another kind of a package culture or art form.
我想世界各地的每一个人种他们大概都有 他们不同的这种经历啊。
I'm sure because we come from different countries and in our own native countries, we also know about all these traditional native cultures.
比如称为什么祭祖灵嘛，
For example, about the ancestral worship.
就是说来祭拜祖先他们的灵魂啊。
And that is to worship those ancestors' souls after they had passed away.
像在我的家乡有什么丰年祭啊，
And there is also one kind of customs in my hometown that is to worship the dead.
最近在台湾总会特别举办了圣职人员的会议啊。
In Taiwan GA recently, they have a meeting of the ministers.
有提到我们这个儿女到学校去可以不可以参加他们的丰年祭啊？
Therefore, one of the topic that they were studying is if it will be okay to allow the children to participate in these kind of rituals.
就是一种庆祝丰收的一种节庆啊。
This kind of activities in their schools.
所以这种节庆都有祭拜天神的这种活动啊。
Because in these kind of activities involve some form of ancestral worship.
因为这种问题弄到了学校学校呢就是有我们的家庭的小孩子参与在里面啊。
Because this cultural tradition and activities had actually penetrated into the schools in Taiwan.
因为之前有特别提到说不可以参加。
Previously, our church has this stand that children from our church were not allowed to participate.
那现在讨论就是说，因为包装了以后，把这种钱就拨到这个里头的活动就让我们教会的小孩子一起去享用。
Because through this discussion, they touch upon that some of the money donated by these children, they were used to organize these kinds of activities.
也就是经过讨论希望总会能够写公文到教育部去做一个决定，请我们教会的小孩子不要参加。
And with the consensus, the Taiwan GA was supposed to write a letter to the education department in Taiwan to mention that the kids from our church are not allowed to participate in these activities.
除了我家乡有这种祭拜偶像的这些活动以外，
And I know that in my hometown, in my village, this is a very common kind of activities.
我会从网络去查，在这个美洲啦、中南美洲、世界各地不同的这种祭祖灵的这些活动
When I search on Google to see if Canada has such kind of activities,
像有查过像墨西哥的这个阿兹特克族崇拜祭活人的这种祭祀活动
and I see that in North America, especially in Mexico, there is this among the Aztec nation in Mexico, they also have this kind of ancestral worshiping of the dead.
好像这个美洲的印第安人
And even the native Indians in North America,
还有秘鲁的印加人、非洲的这种阿萨特人种这样。
and also people in Africa or Peru, they also have similar kinds of worshiping of the dead.
所以像这些都告诉我们都是祭偶像、祭鬼神的这种活动
This is actually worshiping the ghost as well as the spirits, and it's not accepted.
我们身为基督徒都不适合
Because as Christians, we are to stay away from this kind of spiritual false worship.
因为在圣经有多处来警戒我们。
And in the Bible, several the passages told us that we are not supposed to do this kind of thing
为了要保守我们信仰的纯洁度，
in order to stay pure in our faith.
像但以理不是被这个事实来玷污啊。
Daniel refused to be defiled by the things going on around in Babylon.
我们看圣经的勉励，
Let's look at one of the exhortation from the Bible.
雅各书第1章，
Let's turn to the book of James, chapter 1.
雅各书第1章27节，
James, chapter 1, verse 27.
27节，
James, chapter 1, verse 27.
在神我们的父面前，那清洁没有玷污的虔诚，就是看顾在患难中的孤儿寡妇，并且保守自己不沾染世俗。
Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world.
这是告诉我们要认识真实的虔诚啊！
Therefore, this is what true religion is,
因为我们不属于这个世界，
because we do not belong to this world.
更不要去效法这个世界。
Therefore, we must not follow the ways of this world.
那接下来我来探讨第二个主题啊，
Next, I will go to my second point.
在这个主题里头，最主要去了解到但以理所面对的困难的考验。
Let's see the difficulties that Daniel had to face.
这种面对困难的考验会软化我们的信仰，
Because sometimes these kinds of problems, it may weaken and shake our faith.
刚才我们所读过的但以理书里面啊，
And from the passages that we just read in the book of Daniel,
看到当时尼布甲尼撒王他铸了这个金像以后啊，
after King Nebuchadnezzar made the image of gold,
特别在立的这个金像啊，给他开光之礼的时候啊，
and when King Nebuchadnezzar asked the people to worship and bow down before this image,
要去强迫所有的各方各族的人跪拜他。
and he also forced all the people of the world to bow down and worship this image.
那不跪拜的这些人啊，
And for those who refused,
要立刻被扔在烈火的巴比伦城的各个地方的窑中啊。
they will be thrown into a blazing furnace.
因为这种以色列人对于这种神对这个神的这种禁止拜偶像这个诫命是很清楚的。
Because the Israelites knew very well that this is not allowed by God.
可是这个王啊，他有强大的压力啊，
But yet, because this king put a lot of pressure on everybody, including the Israelites, to bow down and worship this image.
又面对了这种烈火的威胁之下，
Therefore, under this threat,
如果你的信仰不够坚定的话，
if you are not strong in your faith,
也许你的立场就会模糊掉了。
then I'm sure it will become totally a blur.
也许你的信仰马上动摇了，
And maybe your faith will be shaken.
说不定真的就妥协了，
And maybe you will compromise and give up your faith altogether.
或者是想些不同的理由去做推卸。
Or maybe you will try to find many kinds of justification to worship and bow down upon this image.
这些种种原因呢，就是为了要保命啊。
It is because you want to survive.
可是今天呢，我们看到但以理的这种励志，
But yet, when we see the great determination and resolve from Daniel,
他坚持他的信仰原则，
he insists to stand on the persistence of his faith,
他绝对要对神一种忠诚。
because it goes to show that he wanted to remain faithful to God.
所以他就面对了这种困难的压迫临到。
Therefore, all the more, this kind of stress of persecution became even greater for him.
这就是他胜过了这一次的一种压迫的要求。
But however, he was able to overcome this threat from the king.
主要他的信心坚定，
It is because his faith was very strong.
所以他就胜过了这一次的困难的这种考验。
Therefore, he was able to overcome this test of his faith.
我们看圣经的勉励，
Let's look at one more exhortation from the Bible.
诗篇34篇
Let's turn to Psalms chapter 34,
19节，
verse 19.
34篇19节，
Psalms chapter 34, verse 19.
19节，
Verse
一人
19.
都有苦难，但耶和华救他脱离这一切。
A righteous man may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all.
没有错，我们的神会靠近伤心的人，
God is near to the brokenhearted,
更拯救这些灵性受压迫的人。
and God will deliver to those people who are crushed in spirit.
这是看到但以理他所面对困难的考验得胜的原因啊。
And this was the reason why Daniel was able to overcome all his trials and testings.
接下来探讨第三个主题，
And next is the third part.
也就是但以理他面对时间的考验。
Daniel had to go through the testing of time.
这种时间的考验，也许会僵化到我们的信仰。
And sometimes, through the passage of time, sometimes it will soften our faith.
刚才我们读过但以理书的6章啊，
We read Daniel chapter 6.
在6章里头，我们看到但以理面对的这个大利乌王来所颁布的这个命令啊，
We know that the edict from King Darius.
所以呢，在这个过程上面，我们看到这个但以理他仍然坚持他的信仰。
And throughout this incident, we can see that Daniel never winked.
在但以理书的6章的10节这里记载，
And in the book of Daniel, chapter 6, verse 10, it says here
说他在楼上的窗户开向耶路撒冷，
that when Daniel learned about the decree, he went home to his upstairs room.
他一日3次双膝跪在神的面前，
And 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed
祷告感谢与素常一样。
and give thanks to his God, just as he had done before.
这个就是看出他因为在他心理上、身体上有美好的灵性的缘故，
We can see that he was a great man of faith, this Daniel,
他因为坚持他的立志，
because he remained persistent in his faith.
他不怕面对的这种狮子坑的威胁，
He was totally unafraid of the den of the lions.
所以他选择违背王的命令。
Therefore, he dared to ignore and disobey the king's command.
他一日3次的祷告，
And he continued to pray 3 times a day.
果然这个祷告蒙神的垂听。
And we can see that God listened to his prayer.
虽然他被丢在狮子坑里头
Even though he was thrown into the lion's den,
神就把狮子口把它封住，
God actually shut the lion's mouths.
所以也没有伤害到他了。
Therefore, there was not even a single scratch
所以
on Daniel's body.
可以看出但以理他不只是在危急之下向神祷告，
Daniel, we can see that he can pray to God even in the deepest and most critical time of his life.
他是把他的祷告看为一种生活的一种方式，
Because prayer has become a lifestyle for Daniel.
所以像这种祷告的方式啊，应该是值得我们去学习的。
And Daniel's prayer life is something that we must learn from.
可是有时候我们因着生活上啊、时间上啊不允许啊，
Because sometimes we all have busy lives and we have no time to pray.
上班忙啦、家务忙啦，种种各方面不同的忙啊，
We are busy at work and then we are busy with household chores.
所以就没有定下这种向神祷告的这种习惯了。
Therefore, we do not have this kind of habit to have a daily prayer every day.
所以像这种素常的祷告，
This regular prayer
这是一种我们要去坚持我们祷告生活的一种最好的一种参考方式。
This kind of a habit to have regular prayers every day is something that we all must cultivate.
也不是只有也不是遇到事情才去祷告，
It is not only when we encounter problems that we kneel down and pray.
就是要常常祷告。
This is something that we have to pray constantly.
像但以理他面对了这种生死存亡的考验的时候，
Daniel, when he was facing this kind of a life-death situation,
但以理他真的把内心的那种美好的灵性完全显露在神的面前了。
Daniel, at this time, he could live out the integrity and the spiritual principle before God.
可见他对神的信心没有动摇。
We can see from here that Daniel's faith before God never wavered.
所以经过我们这3个主题方向的探讨之后啊，
And from these 3 topics,
我们绝对可以看出来啊，
we can see
但以理他真的有美好的灵性啊，
that Daniel had a great faith.
是经得起考验的一种神的仆人啊。
And he was a servant of God that can overcome any forms of testing.
我们一起看箴言的17章。
Let's next turn to Proverbs chapter 17.
箴言17章，我们看第3节。
Proverbs chapter 17, verse 3.
箴言17章第3节，
Proverbs chapter 17, verse 3.
第3节，
Verse 3.
鼎为炼银，炉为炼金，唯有耶和华熬炼人心。
The crucible for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the heart.
从这段经节可以看出来啊，
And from this passage, we can understand
我们的神是垂听我们祷告的真神。
God is a God who listens to our prayers.
果然，但以理他把内心的那种美好灵性表现在神的面前。
And Daniel could pour out the good things that was in his heart to God.
他真的这种熬炼成功了。
And we can see that Daniel passed his testings with flying color.
所以经过这3个角度探讨之后啊，
Therefore, from these 3 angles,
我们确实看出但以理是有美好的灵性。
we can see that Daniel had a stellar faith.
我们下午这一节就探讨到这里。
And our sermon will conclude here this morning.
一起唱诗
Let's all sing hymn
136首。
136.